Hi guys, let's talk about a thesis statement. Now we did this in our first homepage, but I want to go over this PowerPoint with you guys. So let's take a look. Let me move this out of the way. And let's bring this up. And let's start our slideshow. Play from the start. So what? Creating thesis statements. What is the so what? Okay, the so what is what's it all about? Why should I care about why this person has written this paper? The so what, the thesis statement is an answer to the question. People of the Earth is a good television show. Do you think that's a good thesis statement? Does that tell us so what? No, it doesn't. All it does is give an opinion or an aesthetic opinion about the beauty of the television show, right? So it tells us that it's beautiful to whoever has written this sentence, right? So this is an opinion, but it's an aesthetic opinion, which is an appreciation of the television program's beauty. The statement is not a good thesis statement because it leaves out the so what. Right? It's not difficult to express an aesthetic opinion or a statement of personal preference, but that isn't the goal of analytical writing and critical thinking, right? That's not the goal of our thesis statements for our academic papers. We want a so what, okay? So the goals of a thesis statement, let me move this a little bit out of the way, okay? All right, this cat is going to get all up in my business, so I gotta do this. So the goals of a thesis statement. A thesis statement is the main point of an essay. It usually expressed in a single sentence. So it's usually expressed in a single sentence. So that means it's not a question, right? It's a sentence, right? An effective thesis statement should accomplish 3 goals. Right? A thesis statement should, 1, reveal what your essay is about, right? 2, state the point you'll make about the topic, right? And forecast how the essay will be organized. So a thesis statement does 3 things: tells what the essay is about, states the point we're making about our topic, and tells how our paper is going to be organized. Those are the 3 things a thesis statement does. So a sample thesis statement. Blue is the topic, red is the position, and green is the way the essay will be structured. So all the words we see in blue is the topic. All the words we see in red is the position, and all the words we see in green is the way the essay is going to be structured. So let's take a look. Playing team sports, especially football and baseball, develop skills and qualities that can make you successful in life because these sports demand communication, teamwork, and responsibility. So what's the topic? Where is the letters in blue? Here are the letters in blue. Team sports, that's the topic, right? What is the position that the author is making, right? That these sports, football and baseball, develop qualities that can make a person successful, right? Develop qualities that can make a person successful, right? And how is our paper going to be organized? Well, we're going to talk about communication. We're going to talk about teamwork and, let's go back. And we're going to talk about responsibility. This video, I'm telling you, right? Okay, so more sample thesis statements. So through its outlandish premise, People of the Earth explores social behavior by challenging cultural codes of race and gender. So what's my topic? People of the Earth. What's my point? explores social behavior by challenging cultural codes. How's my paper going to be organized? By race and gender. Okay. So here's my thesis statement. Okay, so the concern is with the topic's meaning within a larger cultural context. So a working thesis, right? It is rare for a writer to develop a perfect thesis statement early in the writing process and to write an effective essay that fits it exactly. So what that's saying is there's no perfection. The first time you write your thesis statement, it's not going to be perfect. You're probably going to write your thesis statement a bunch of times, right? And just so you know, you can say an idea multiple ways with completely different words, which is one of the things I'm going to ask you to do in your second essay, right? Is to say the same idea multiple times with completely different words, right? So a working thesis might not have the structure, right? Or it just might have your topic, or it just might have your point, but that's okay because it's a working thesis. And remember, in this class, we have a writing process and we revise. We write, we revise, we revise, we write, we revise, we write, rewrite, we revise. Okay, so start with a working thesis. Okay, that is a statement that can guide you, but that you will ultimately refine. Okay, ideas for your working thesis are probably all around you. Okay, so constructing effective thesis statements. An effective thesis statement is a central idea that requires supporting evidence. Its scope is appropriate for the required length of the essay, and it is sharply focused. Okay. It should answer a question you have posed, resolve a problem you have identified, or take a position in a debate, right? So now you notice since the very beginning of the semester, I've been asking you to practice incorporating the question into your response, okay? So a thesis statement is an answer to a question. It is a resolution to a problem. It takes a position in a debate. It is never a question itself, okay? So when constructing a thesis statement, ask yourself, can I successfully develop it with the sources available to me and for the purpose I have identified? So you don't want your thesis to be too wide and then, oh my God, I'm writing a book, or to be too narrow and only thing you can get out of it is a paragraph. Right? Can I explain the reason people should be interested in reading an essay that explores this thesis? So these are some questions that you can ask yourself, okay? So thesis needs proof. So a thesis statement needs proof, right? A thesis requires proof or further development through facts and details. It cannot itself be a fact or a description. So a thesis statement cannot be a fact or a description. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? That's a fact. That's not a thesis statement. So let's look at this example here. Here is a draft. The first polygraph was developed by Dr. John A. Larson in 1921. That is a draft thesis statement, but the problem with it is a fact. So a reader needs to disagree or agree, or it has to have some kind of debate. So there has to be a position, like somebody should be able to disagree with you, right? So no further development of this idea is required because it's a fact, okay? Smoking is bad for you. That is a fact, right? There's no debate, okay? So here's a strategy. Enter a debate by posing a question about your topic that has more than one possible answer. For example, should the polygraph be used by private employers? Your thesis statement should be an answer to the question, right? Now, here's the revised thesis statement. Because the polygraph has not been proven reliable, even under controlled conditions, its use by employers should be banned. Could anybody disagree with me? Yes, that's a thesis statement. Now we're cooking with gas, right? All right, let's move forward. So the thesis is the answer. A thesis should be an answer to a question, not a question itself. So a thesis statement is not a fact. A thesis statement is not a question. Okay. Would John F. Kennedy have continued to escalate the Vietnam War if he had lived? That cannot be a thesis, right? That's a question, right? So the problem is it's a question and not an answer. A thesis statement is an answer to a question. It's something that somebody can disagree with me with, right? We can enter into a debate with. So it's not a fact, it's not a question. So take a position on your topic by answering the question you have posed. Your thesis should be an answer to your question. Now, here's a revise. Although John F. Kennedy sent the first American troops to Vietnam before he died, an analysis of his foreign policy suggests that he would not have escalated the war had he lived, right? Well, somebody can disagree with me. No, he would have escalated the war had he lived, right? That's something that someone can take a stance on. It can have a debate, okay? Let's keep going. Thesis, not too broad. A thesis should be sufficient in scope for your assignment. It shouldn't be too broad. So here's one that's hugely broad. Mapping the human genome has many implications for health and science. Oh my God, that's like volumes. That's like A to Z encyclopedia of mapping the human genome and health and science, right? That's way broad, right? Even a very long research paper, you would not be able to discuss all the implications of mapping the human genome. That's huge, right? So now what's the strategy? Consider subtopics of your original topic. So you're talking about the human genome. Well, let's make a subtopic, right? Let's talk about genetic diseases, okay? So once you've chosen a subtopic, take a position in an ongoing debate and pose a question that has more than one answer. For example, should people be tested for genetic disease, right? Your thesis should be your answer to this question, right? So should people be tested for genetic disease, right? So because the genome, mapping the human genome has many implications, right? People should be tested, right? Okay, let me stop. Here we go. Let's look at the revised. Although scientists can now detect genetic predisposition for specific diseases, policymakers should establish guidelines about whom to test and under what circumstances, right? So do you agree with that? Should they or shouldn't they? No, policymakers should not, right, establish guidelines, right? Because, right, the human genome, testing the human genome, right, reveals, right, our genetic dispositions, but also reveals our hereditary, like who we are related to. Should policymakers develop guidelines as to who gets to have access to people's genetic testing? And under what circumstances, okay? And that's the end. Then, all right, guys. So watch this video and then take the quiz.